So, Lone Rider here, and if you're like me, you remember when mountain bikes kind of looked like this, as opposed to the, carbon and all kinds of weird stuff they are now. Now, this is my new project, and as you can see, it's clearly from that era. It's not truly an old school mountain bike, but it's not modern either. It's sort of transitional. It's an interesting mix of the old and the new. This Trek 4300 is a work in progress. I'm still not done with it. I've put on my own wheels, my own tires, my own fork, my own stem, my own seat. I do plan to go from these low rise bars to flat bars, possibly with bar ends. I also plan to replace the extremely entry level and low end Shimano drivetrain with some nicer SRAM stuff that I've gotten. In the process, this will probably go from 8 speed to 9 speed. I actually have the 9 speed cassette that was originally on these wheels. That's going to be going back on and so on and so forth. But I wanted to talk about two things. One, buyer beware or consumer beware, generally speaking, when you're getting a secondhand bike, whether it's something that somebody's giving you, you're getting in trade, whether you're actually paying money for it, or whether you pick it up curbside that somebody's discarding it. In particular, the person I got this from said, "Oh, it's always been kept in a dry garage." Well, every bolt head and exposed piece of steel on this bike was rusted. In fact, the water bottle bolts here are my own anodized red ones. Those are there not so much because I wanted to trick this out with anodized red bolts before I finished upgrading the important stuff like the drivetrain. They're there because I had to replace the bolts that were there because they were so rusted. I actually could barely get a Allen key in them to turn them. They were so encrusted with corrosion that it was filling the inside of the Allen key notch. That's pretty bad. And that same thing was true with all the bolts on the stock stem and corrosion like that doesn't occur because the bike's left out in the rain once or twice. Corrosion like that really is a sign of constant neglect. So when somebody tells you, always kept in dry garage, I mean, take it with a grain of salt, right? That said, it's a nice platform to start working on. And since I didn't actually end up stripping any of these or the inserts, thank goodness, I was able to proceed and move on with the rest of it. But so first of all, caveat emptor, somebody tells you something about the condition of a used bike, take it with a grain of salt, use your own eyes. Don't rely on just what people say. Secondly, when you get a bike, don't just look at it and be like, this doesn't fit me, this doesn't feel right, whatever. Consider what your options are as far as changing things. The parts that were on this, which may have been stock as far as the stem, the fork, and the seat go, were incredibly crummy. But more than that, they were cramped. They provided a very short, squished in cockpit. They didn't give you the adequate reach. I found that what works for me is the old 1 cubit measurement, where you put your elbow here, and where your middle fingers end up is about where your bar should be, and on this that tends to be that's more or less the exact measurement. And I found that this is a better stem length. It's not as tall. It's not as obnoxiously tall. The other one had an uncut steer that was taller than the seat. So it's not as obnoxiously tall, and it's a little more forward. The fork is obviously a better quality fork, although it's older. This had an RST Gila fork on it, which was newer than this, but not as good quality as the Rock Sox Judy, which isn't the greatest thing in the world, but it's definitely better quality than that piece of junk that was on here. There are some nice RST forks. This wasn't one of them. The condition that it was in wasn't nice, and the quality of the fork itself wasn't nice. So there we go. Then the seat, of course, this is my own San Marco. I like these things. Not as cool as a Flight or a WTB Rocket, but it's up there as one of my preferreds. So essentially, when I changed the setup of the bike, I actually changed how everything fit, and the bike went from being really short and stubby to having adequate length and reach, and being very comfortable to sit on and ride. So. That it always had the potential to fit properly. It was just set up wrong, basically. And that's something to think about. But this is, like I said, it's sort of a transitional bike. It has the mounts for disc brakes, front and rear. You know, you have some features that are newer, and some that are older. I don't have a problem with newer stuff, but I like this. I'm partial to this type of bike, and so this is my new project I'm working on. Now I intend to swap the Shimano for SRAM, like I said. This is entry-level Shimano, nothing great. I intend to do a few more tweaks on it, but basically as it is right now, it is rideable. And you know, that's another thing that I hadn't done a complete rebuild on a bike. Well, it's not even a complete rebuild. I didn't touch the bottom bracket of the cranks yet. But I mean, in terms of, you know, replacing the fork, the wheels, you know, all that stuff. I haven't done any major work on the bike in a little while, and I was wondering if I still had the knack. And well, I guess I still have the knack. So anyway, but this is the latest project, and it will turn out to hopefully be a early 2000s, you know, retro bike, basically, when I'm done with it. Intend to get some nicer, like I said, mid-level to high-end parts and ride the bejesus out of this thing. So there you go. It's the project I'm working on now. Lone Rider out. Stay cool.